What happens when two truly conscious individuals finally meet? The mind instinctively longs for a simple narrative. Two people who have traversed their own inner labyrinths, coming together in absolute harmony, where all searching ceases, the internal storms vanish, and the story reaches a tranquil conclusion. Yet, throughout my decades spent studying the architecture of the human mind, observing its hidden corridors and its relentless search for meaning, I found the reality to be infinitely more complex and vastly more interesting. The fundamental paradox of human connection is this: the precise moment you cease needing another person to complete you is the exact moment you become genuinely capable of meeting them. Not the illusory figure you have spent years projecting onto every passing stranger who stirred a fleeting tremor in your heart, but the actual person sitting across from me. A genuine meeting of souls that alters the entire trajectory of an individual's life. I came to understand this truth not merely through intellectual investigation, but because I was forced to live it. I observed it in my clinical practice, and I wrestled with it intimately within the deep, often turbulent waters of my own relationships. Through those experiences, I mapped the psychological territory of how two human beings establish a profound, authentic connection. It does not occur through raw emotional hunger, nor through psychological projection, but through what the ancient alchemists called the konaiunctio, the sacred integration of two whole, self-contained beings. In watching these dynamics unfold, I noticed something remarkable. When an individual reaches a certain threshold of internal readiness for this depth of connection, the external world often seems to arrange itself in response. I termed this phenomenon synchronicity, the occurrence of meaningful coincidences that defy strict causal, logical explanation. You find yourself dwelling upon a specific thought, and suddenly an unexpected letter arrives. You reach a point of acute psychological transformation, and a person embodying the very nature of that transformation enters your life. You stand ready for genuine connection, and you continually cross paths with a particular individual under circumstances that chance alone cannot adequately explain. Synchronicity, however, is not a matter of mere fortune. It operates when you have aligned yourself with your deeper nature, when you are living authentically, having undertaken the arduous task of becoming who you actually are. It is as though the outer world reflects back the order and wholeness you have cultivated within. The overwhelming majority of people approach relationships from a state of internal fragmentation. I have watched this pattern repeat itself endlessly, and I have felt its pull within myself. We encounter someone, and suddenly they appear to possess every quality we lack. Where we are plagued by self-doubt, they display quiet confidence. Where our inner world is chaotic, they remain steady. Where we feel bound by our circumstances, they seem remarkably free. We misinterpret this sensation, telling ourselves, "This is the one I have been seeking. This is my missing half." Yet what no one tells you is that the intense, electrifying spark you feel in those moments is rarely love. It is psychological recognition. You are recognizing your own hidden, unconscious mind, your disowned fragments reflected back at you in the face of another person. That moment of recognition feels like magic, but the spell inevitably breaks. Eventually, the other person can no longer bear the weight of your unfulfilled expectations. Eventually, they reveal their mundane human limits. The fantasy collapses, and you are left standing amid the ruins, wondering how something so seemingly miraculous could turn into disillusionment. Recall, if you will, the last person who took your breath away. Remember that overwhelming conviction that you had known them across lifetimes, that they possessed a unique key to your soul, that they were the ultimate answer to questions you had carried in silence for years. That experience was not a total delusion. It was a genuine encounter with something real. But you were not recognizing them. You were recognizing yourself. You were observing your own untapped potential mirrored in their eyes, your own unexplored psychological depths, your own unlived life projected onto their story. I categorize these unconscious inner figures as the anima and the animus, the essential feminine aspect within the male psyche, and the essential masculine aspect within the female psyche. When these internal archetypes remain unintegrated, we inevitably cast them outward onto the people we meet. We do not fall in love with the actual human being standing before us. We fall in love with our own soul, desperately attempting to know and integrate itself through the physical vessel of another. Every relationship in your past that began with overwhelming intensity only to conclude in bitter disappointment follows this exact mechanism. You did not necessarily make a foolish choice. You made an unconscious one. You were attempting to acquire from the external world that which can only be forged within the furnace of your own self-awareness. This is why a genuine psychological awakening fundamentally alters the nature of love. Awakening, in the sense I have come to understand it, requires an individual to do what the vast majority continuously avoid, to turn their gaze inward rather than outward. It demands that you descend into your own darkness and face your shadow, all those hidden, unacceptable parts of yourself you have spent a lifetime attempting to disown or deny. It requires you to discard the persona, the mask you wear to secure the approval of society. It forces you to integrate your inner opposite, making peace with the dualities inside you. Through this process, you touch the self, that central archetype of order and wholeness that lies far beyond the narrow boundaries of the ego. You become whole, not flawless, not immune to suffering, but whole. When an individual operates from wholeness, the entire nature of relationship changes. You no longer wander the world searching for someone to complete your existence, for you have realized that you were never a half-being to begin with. You cease trying to fill an aching internal void, because you have learned to sit quietly in the silence of that void until it reveals its underlying richness. This internal state is the absolute prerequisite for what I consider a truly conscious union. When you finally arrive at this place of quiet integration, having endured the silent, necessary work of self-realization, you may meet someone who causes you to stop in your tracks, not because they promise to fix your life, but because they actually see you, and in their gaze you perceive something you may never have witnessed before, another whole, self-aware human being. This encounter carries none of the desperate, grasping anxiety of projection. It possesses the steady, quiet gravity of mutual recognition. It is fundamentally distinct from the romantic fever of your past. You will recognize it by the presence of clarity alongside attraction, peace alongside vitality, and a deep, quiet curiosity alongside desire. You observe their wounds and their shadows, yet you feel no neurotic drive to repair or save them. You are drawn toward them, yet you remain entirely rooted in your own ground. This is what transpires when conscious individuals meet. Not the naive fairy tale of perpetual bliss, but a profound human reality that demands every ounce of self-awareness you have cultivated, continually challenging you to expand your capacity for truth. Consider how an ordinary attraction begins. You are at a gathering, and across a crowded room, your eyes meet those of a stranger. Something deep within you stirs. The conversation flows effortlessly, as if continuing a dialogue interrupted long ago. They laugh at your observations. They seem captivated by your presence. Within a short time, the thought arises. Could this finally be the person? There is a precise psychological reason why this experience feels so compelling and undeniable. Yet the person you have just fallen for is rarely who you think they are. In that initial flash of intensity, you are not perceiving their true nature. You are watching a projection of your own unconscious mind playing across them, like an image cast onto a blank screen. You are seeing the unintegrated elements of your own psyche, the qualities you have rejected, the emotional capacities you have kept locked away, returned to you in human form. For a man, this outward projection is driven by the anima, his underlying undeveloped feminine nature, his capacity for feeling, intuition, and emotional depth. For a woman, it is driven by the animus, her underlying masculine nature, her capacity for focused assertion, logic, and decisive action. Yet regardless of how these energies manifest, whenever they remain unconscious, we cast them onto the world. A man beholds a woman who appears infinitely mysterious, emotionally resonant, and profound. In truth, he is looking at his own unplumbed emotional depth. A woman beholds a man who seems unflinching, decisive, and powerful. In truth, she is looking at her own undeveloped capacity for personal agency. We fall in love not with who they are as individuals, but with who our own psyche demands we become. This is why initial projection feels like a revelation of completeness. Psychologically, it is an experience of completeness. You are encountering the missing dimensions of your own being, except you are attempting to possess them externally rather than cultivating them within. No human being can bear the weight of such an illusion indefinitely. Think back to a past relationship that consumed you. Remember how luminous they appeared initially. You compiled a mental list of their extraordinary qualities: compassionate, brilliant, vibrant, deep. Now recall how that very same list gradually transformed into a ledger of grievances. Their compassion began to look like weakness. Their depth revealed itself as emotional withdrawal. Their vitality turned into chaotic unpredictability. What actually occurred? The individual did not fundamentally alter. Rather, the projection began to dissolve. You began to see them as they truly were, a complex, flawed, struggling human being. And because you had fallen in love with your own projected ideal rather than the person standing before you, you felt betrayed, as though a deliberate deception had taken place. But they did not deceive you. Your own unconscious mind orchestrated the illusion, using that individual to show you precisely what needed to be brought to light within yourself. Every person you have passionately pursued in this unconscious state was an attempt by your psyche to heal its own division through another. When this dynamic remains unexamined, it becomes a repetitive cycle. Different names, different faces, yet the same underlying tragedy. You meet someone new, convinced that experience has taught you wisdom, yet months later, you find yourself standing in the same emotional landscape, facing the same disillusionment, mourning the collapse of another ideal. I have observed this cycle progress through distinct stages. First comes enchantment. The person appears ideal. Your life feels suddenly illuminated. You tell yourself that the search is finally over. Second comes disillusionment. The ordinary humanity of the partner begins to bleed through the fantasy. The ideal image cracks. Small irritations accumulate: the way they speak, their personal habits, their emotional demands, their distance. Third comes the power struggle. Having realized that the partner does not match the internal projection, the ego attempts to force them back into the mold. You demand to know why they have changed, why they are no longer as attentive, mysterious, or spontaneous as they once seemed. You criticize, maneuver, and plead, attempting to sculpt a living person into an internal ideal. But they cannot sustain that ideal, for it never belonged to them in the first place. Finally, the dynamic reaches its end in either dissolution or psychological deadness. Either the relationship breaks apart, sending both individuals back into the world to find new screens for their projections, or they remain together in a state of quiet resignation. They become two strangers sharing a domestic routine, telling themselves that passion is an illusion and that this cold detachment is simply the inevitable reality of adulthood. Yet the problem was never that love inevitably fades. The problem was that the connection was never anchored in reality to begin with. Most individuals spend their entire lives trapped within this loop. But there exists a third possibility, a departure from the cycle entirely. It requires an act of courage that few are willing to undertake, to stop searching for salvation in the eyes of another and to turn one's attention inward. This is where true psychological awakening begins. It does not begin with finding the right partner. It begins with doing the brutal, necessary work of becoming whole oneself. For many, this awakening is initiated by crisis, a devastating rupture, a divorce that strips away long-held illusions, or a series of failed connections that forces the ultimate question: what if the common denominator in all my suffering is not the inadequacy of others, but my own unconsciousness? What if I am continually bringing the same unexamined wounds into every room I enter? For others, the shift arrives not through dramatic collapse, but through a quiet, lingering exhaustion. You simply tire of playing a role, tire of the endless performance, tire of the painful divide between the persona you project to the world and the reality of your inner life. You simply cease chasing. You stop demanding that another person validate your existence. In that moment of stillness, a fundamental shift occurs. You begin the process I termed individuation, the journey toward becoming your true, integrated self. To understand this journey, one must understand that awakening is not a mystical escape from human reality. It is a precise psychological process that demands we pass through distinct thresholds. The first threshold is the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow consists of all those aspects of your personality that your conscious ego prefers to ignore, deny, or hide. It contains your unacknowledged anger, your subtle jealousies, your capacity for selfishness, your petty resentments, and your capacity for deceit. Most people dedicate immense energy to fleeing their shadow, projecting its contents onto those around them. When you find yourself intensely judging a specific trait in another, you are almost always gazing at a disowned fragment of your own shadow. The individual who is obsessively consumed by the dishonesty of others is often blind to their own subtle evasions. Facing the shadow requires you to claim these disowned fragments. It does not mean acting upon every destructive impulse, but it does require the honest admission that those impulses reside within you. This confrontation is profoundly uncomfortable, for it dismantles the neat story the ego tells about its own innocence. The mask of the good person begins to slip, revealing the complex, dark, and light reality beneath. Yet, when you hold these opposing forces in conscious awareness without fleeing them, a remarkable psychological shift occurs, what I termed the transcendent function. A third state of consciousness emerges. You recognize that you are neither purely good nor purely evil, neither saint nor villain, but a complex totality containing both. In accepting this paradox, you achieve wholeness. The shadow loses its chaotic control over your behavior. You no longer project your disowned dark aspects onto your partner, dragging them into battles with your own reflection. You become fundamentally trustworthy, not because you are incapable of harm, but because you are fully aware of your capacity for it and consciously choose another path. The second threshold is the dismantling of the persona. The persona is the social mask we construct to navigate society and secure approval. It is the protective armor of the dependable child, the stoic provider, the intellectual authority, or the perpetual caretaker. A persona is not inherently evil. We require a functional boundary between our inner world and the public sphere. The tragedy occurs when an individual forgets they are wearing a mask and begins to identify entirely with the role. Relinquishing this total identification with the persona is terrifying, for it exposes you to the possibility of social rejection. If you have built your entire identity on being perpetually composed, admitting your internal confusion feels like annihilation. Yet, shedding the absolute reliance on this mask is the only path to genuine freedom. Living authentically, even if it results in the departure of those who only loved your mask, is infinitely preferable to being embraced for a person you are not. The third threshold is the integration of the anima or animus. This requires developing those psychological capacities that your conscious identity has pushed into the background. For a man, this often involves cultivating a conscious relationship with his internal world of feeling, intuition, and receptivity. For a woman, it often involves developing her innate capacity for focused agency, boundary setting, and objective thought. Beyond gender, it is the integration of your functional opposites. If you are predominantly rational, you must learn to honor the non-rational wisdom of emotion and body. If you are swept away by feeling, you must cultivate the grounding structure of intellect. So long as these inner opposites remain unintegrated, you will project them onto others, seeking partners who act as external proxies for your own uncultivated capacities. This dynamic breeds dependency and quiet resentment. But when you integrate these opposite energies within your own psyche, you cease demanding that another carry them for you. The fourth threshold is the realization of the self. The self is not the ego. It is not that restless, chattering voice in your head that constantly seeks validation and fears its own impermanence. The self is the deeper, organizing center of the entire psyche, encompassing both the conscious and unconscious realms. It is the quiet background of awareness that witnesses all your thoughts, emotions, and life experiences. This realization often comes quietly, through moments of profound reflection, through suffering, through engagement with art, or through simple, unadorned presence. You realize with absolute clarity that you are not merely your personal history, your trauma, your achievements, or your failures. You are the enduring awareness that beholds them all. This awareness brings both deep humility and profound strength. Humility because you see the smallness of the ego's preoccupations. Strength because you are no longer at their mercy. When an individual has undertaken this inner labor, relationship ceases to be a desperate search for emotional sustenance. You no longer approach another person out of lack. You approach them out of abundance. You are not looking for someone to save you, nor are you looking for someone to fix. You are looking for an encounter between two independent realities. This is the true nature of soul recognition. It is rare, not because suitable partners do not exist, but because individuals who have pursued their own internal integration to this depth are uncommon. Most people remain content with the safety of their projections, their masks, and their familiar cycles. And an unconscious individual, no longer how well-intentioned, cannot engage in a fully conscious union. When two individuated souls meet, the nature of their interaction is radically different from ordinary romance. Consider how such an encounter unfolds in daily life. Having spent years doing your internal work, taking responsibility for your emotional wounds, and coming to terms with your shadow, you cross paths with someone. The initial interaction may lack the manic, destabilizing urgency of past romantic obsessions, but it possesses a distinct, quiet clarity. As you speak, you observe a unique quality in their presence. They listen without preparing a defense. They speak candidly of their life without adopting the posture of a victim. They demonstrate a conscious, responsible relationship with their own psyche. You recognize that this individual has also walked through their own inner fire. The early stages of such a relationship are marked by a rare absence of posturing. Neither person feels compelled to perform a role or hide their imperfections. There is vulnerability, but it is accompanied by personal strength. Neither demands to be rescued, nor do they seek to manage the other. As intimacy deepens, a profound dynamic emerges. The presence of the other acts as an invitation to remain conscious. When a moment of emotional friction occurs, as it inevitably must, the instinctive impulse to attack or withdraw is tempered by awareness. You pause and examine the reaction within yourself. Is this sudden surge of defensiveness truly caused by the person before me, or has an unhealed fragment of my past been disturbed? Because both individuals possess this self-awareness, conflict changes its character. It ceases to be a battle for dominance and becomes an opportunity for illumination. This creates a psychological state analogous to what anthropologists call participation mystique, a shared psychological field in which two distinct individuals experience a profound underlying unity without surrendering their distinct identities. You retain your individual boundaries, yet you are deeply attuned to the reality of the other. It is not codependency. It is conscious interdependence. This form of connection allows for remarkable freedom within intimacy. You do not seek to own the other person, nor do you allow yourself to be absorbed by them. You remain two complete trees growing side by side, sharing the same soil and sky, yet taking care not to cast each other into perpetual shadow. Yet let us shed any naive sentimentality. This path is not easy. In many respects, conscious love is far more demanding than unconscious relationship. In an unconscious relationship, you retain the convenient luxury of blaming your partner for your internal distress. If you are unhappy, it is their failure. If you feel insecure, it is their coldness. If you are angry, it is their provocation.